Good evening to all of you. Thank you, Ravi. I think it's an honor, it's a privilege to be here in this gathering and to share what Government of India is attempting to do in the area of cloud computing. Now, we just heard a few minutes back that internationally countries, US, UK, Australia, Singapore, Korea, they've already started cloud in a big way. In fact, they have their cloud policies and strategies in place. And they have their objectives very clear. If we look at these strategies, we see that cost is one of the important aspects which they're trying to address through cloud computing. That is where you see a lot of focus happening in terms of hybrid clouds, public clouds, accompanying many challenges which come along with. So while these initiatives are happening, we were also trying to look at the kind of applications which are being put on cloud. And while you do see application profiling, data classification happening, primarily we saw that it is the non-critical applications, the low-risk applications which are initially being attempted at the public clouds. And what we see is software as a service, infrastructure as a service. I mean, they are moving with software, collaboration softwares and all, taking a lead. Now, looking at all this, I just wanted to take a minute and share, as far as India is concerned, our journey into cloud computing started by trying to see what is it under the National E-Governance Plan that we've laid across the country. And how do we optimally utilize what has been set up? There's a huge infrastructure in terms of data centers across the country. We have 4 national data centers, 3 already available from NIC, the 4th one on the way. We have state data centers in every state and UT. We also have a lot of NIC server farm areas, the data centers, mini data centers. Even the states have their own data centers. There are a lot of private data centers across the country. So there's a huge infrastructure which has been put up across the country. But is this optimally being utilized? So the very first challenge for us when we started looking at cloud was, how do we see what are the new technologies which will enable us to fully utilize this infrastructure? Because if you look at the various projects under the National E-Governance Plan, whether you talk about income tax, excise, MC, or whatever it is, they all have been designed for peak loads. But the peak loads are not going to be permanent. So if that is so, there is a huge underutilization of the infrastructure in the non-peak loads. So there was a need felt in terms of utilization from this aspect also. Now, if you look at the applications which are rolled out across the country, you have almost what we've seen is 27 versions of one application across the country. Of course, because India, every state is a country in itself, so they have their own requirements, their own language, customization, process requirements. But at the same time, as we now see, the new technologies like multi-tenancy in the cloud can enable us to move into a single instance, single database schema into that roadmap. So the idea and objective is, how do we move into this? How do we see that there is a consolidation not only from the infrastructure, but also from the applications perspective? And third, of course, as we all see, there are huge procurement cycles in the government. I mean, even if somebody, any department wants to bring out a software, a simple software, the development for which could be just 3 months. However, the entire cycle of preparing a DPR, identifying a consultant, going into an RFP, bid process, and finally getting into the development, into the niche area, which is their domain area, it takes more than a year or so. So is there a way, agile way of service delivery? Can I reduce this cycle? And I have something which we say the utility-based services. Can I have something the way I have the electricity and water billing? And somebody tells me, okay, this is the infrastructure, this is secure, this is how you'll be getting it. And this, I can be up and running in the next 2 months, 3 months or something. So if you look at in government, these have been important concerns when we started looking at cloud. Incidentally, cost is also an additional factor, I would say. But the objectives emerging from the optimum utilization. Because what we see is Indian scenario is quite different if you look at from the way infrastructure has been laid across by other countries. If you see USA, they are strong in compliance in regulations, and they actually leverage the private by putting the necessary contractual security, all sorts of norms, and they work in that direction. So it is not that they put up their infrastructures, they own the infrastructures. Whereas if you see in India, the journey has been in laying down the government infrastructures across the country. So the way the cloud has to be handled, the way things have to be addressed, while there are a lot of benefits, but it has the other side also. The benefits in terms of a lot of cloud challenges that we see from the security, privacy. If you are actually putting up in your data centers and you also have location-based cloud services, the challenges get reduced further. So with these objectives, what happened is, before government could come up with a holistic approach, we saw sporadic initiatives happening across the country. We saw states which are very progressive, who want to work with the new technologies, immediately started with the virtualization. They started seeing how with just 1 or 2 physical servers, I can meet the requirements of for small applications of multiple departments. So that's how the whole thing started. We have, of course, Neeta is going to be sharing her views, and they are, in fact, into the virtualization and now into the cloud at the national data centers level. So even they started working on this, considering that there is a requirement and there is a need for this particular thing. In fact, the R&D, we also started with R&D on the open source cloud. We have a Meghdoot cloud platform by CDAC developed. So we also did some pilots with various private players. We did some POCs with multiple cloud technologies at the live state data centers in the production environment. The objective was to try and see what are the issues per se before you take up such a major initiative for a country. Issues with respect to interoperability, issues with respect to portability, because if I have to build a cloud architecture for a country, I need to see today, is it possible for one cloud management solution to work with the other? Can I get the elasticity across the cloud? What are the issues? What are the concerns? Where are we today, and after how many years do I see this interoperability happening? So these are some of the issues, learnings which went into building an architecture for the country. So with all these as a background, Government of India, right at the policy level, whether it's the national telecom policy, whether it's the national IT policy, there are very clear statements and commitments from the government to leverage cloud computing. And DIT per se, Department of Electronics and IT, to give shape to these policies, to actually get into the implementation mode, set up 2 committees. We call the working groups and the task forces. Now, one working group which has been set up under the chairmanship of Chris Gopalakrishnan, CEO Infosys, now President CII, is to look at the regulatory legal aspects in the proliferation of cloud and how India can be seen as a hub for the cloud computing. So this is to see what is the ecosystem requirement, right from the taxation, right from the, I would say, the cloud parks per se, or you talk about the power requirements, or if you want to export cloud services from India, or you want to bring the various multinationals setting up clouds in the country. So what are the legal issues? What are the changes you need to bring in the IT Act? What are those cross-border aspects, the jurisdiction issues? So how do we address? What is it that we do if I want to allow data moving across outside the country? So there have been deliberations. Of course, they are yet to come up with the report. Now, the other, which I'll be spending a little time on, the other initiative is a task force was parallelly set up to see how government can adopt cloud in a big way. And this started as a part, it has started as a part of the National E-Governance Plan. And the idea is, but of course, the two groups are going to work in tandem, because what we get as an input from the from the working group will be used by the government when they are addressing the cloud services for the country. So this task force, after several rounds of meetings, which had participation of industry, has come up with what we call the two reports. One is the Cloud Strategy Direction Paper, and the second is the Cloud Implementation Roadmap for government as a user of cloud computing. In fact, these reports subsequently also have been discussed with a couple of industry associations at length. And we are really happy for the kind of inputs which have been given to ensure that it's a fair playing field for even the private and the government. Because it's extremely important that if a policy says that you should have cloud-ready applications, or if a policy says that tomorrow you should leverage the cloud-enabled applications like infrastructure as service and all, now where is that infrastructure? Do we see that what we have currently based on the government infrastructures, state data centers or the national data centers, will that be sufficient to handle applications which are not only existing, which will be migrated, but the new large applications which are coming up? The answer is no. The private will have to play a very important role, and it is a complete ecosystem of government and private which will work together to see that this strategy and the implementation roadmap is implemented in the, I would say, the shortest possible time. Because in fact, we all started these discussions in the cloud something like 7 to 8 months back. And we're glad to see that we've actually come to a stage where the reports will be approved in the next week's time or so, and they should be available for everybody to see. Now, if I look at the kind of architecture that we're talking about as a part of the government GI Cloud initiative, in fact, that has been coined as Meghraj by our secretary. It is talking about discrete set of cloud components, national clouds, state clouds, and we have the hybrid clouds. We have public. We also are talking about cloud setup by the private, which are dedicated for the government. We're talking about something like empaneling of the cloud service providers in order to ensure that the demand with respect to various cloud services is met, and we are able to provide the kind of agility which is demanded in the cloud environment. Of course, one of the big challenges that we have in front is what we call the data classification and application profiling. We need to ensure, while you have a level playing field, we also need to see what are our low-risk applications, what are our mid-risk applications, what are the high-risk applications, and what are the kind of security norms that we put in place to address. So, and then how do we move into this direction? So, in order to address all this, governance is extremely important. We have a complete governance mechanism that we've laid out as a part of the report. One of the important aspects is what we call the Architecture Management Office. We see that standards, policies, guidelines, frameworks are going to be the heart of this whole initiative, supplemented by the necessary regulatory and compliance requirements. Whether you talk about standards with respect to the new IT procurements, the policies, guidelines, whether you talk about even today, if I try and see the pricing, the cloud pricing which is available, that's not uniform for any state government today. If they want to see what is it that I get from cloud service provider A and B, there are different. So you need to templatize and see that everybody is providing you the necessary costing, pricing. So there is a requirement in terms of the necessary guidance which the government has to give. Even in terms of if you try to see the IT infrastructure augmentation in the existing infrastructure which has been laid out by the government, there are no clear norms. But if I want to provide services like infrastructure within 30 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever it is, I need to have clear-cut policies in place. So I need to build that clear ecosystem in place. So we do see there is an important role even on the contractual agreements when we talk about even on the privacy of the data. In fact, today there are a lot of things which are addressed as a part of the IT Act, but then there is a need to come up with a Privacy Act. The work in this direction has started. We know that in tits and bits we have 43A and a lot of those things are being addressing. But in terms of when you start talking about cloud, what then the privacy and security, especially when we move into the cross-border, they will have to be addressed very clearly, and we will have to come up with clear best practices, norms which have to be followed by whoever is providing cloud services to the government in the country. And when we talk about a discrete cloud environment, what I see is to simplify the whole delivery mechanism, there is a need to come up with a single services cloud directory, I would say, where whoever is a part of the GI cloud will publish their services, whether it is infrastructure, whether it's software, whole lot of new services also, virtual desktop. We're trying to see security as a service, whole lot of new services are going to come up. So, but they all should be published at one place. Today, since we have interoperability issues, I see this to begin with as a place where this is a repository which is making the services available. But tomorrow, I'm sure this is going to land up into a provisioning also, when we are able to talk between one cloud solution provider to another at the management layer, not at the virtualization only. Apart from that, if you see other important aspects you need to see is a showcasing. There is a great need in the country to showcase the various government departments the power of the cloud, what you can get if you, a place where the departments can bring their application, they can see the performance functionality in different cloud environments. There is a need for having a strong international collaboration. There is a need to try and see how the basic capacity building and awareness in the country can be brought about. So we're talking about something like Center of Excellence for Cloud Computing, which is another important area which we will have to address. We also have something on the cloud utilities per se. While private is going to continuously play a very important role, right from the managed cloud service providers to setting up dedicated clouds to being empaneled to give various cloud services, and also in the design and development of the cloud-ready applications. So there is a requirement to have something like the cloud store or the app store per se. And so we are, in fact, we are already working with NIC in this direction. And we do intend to see, as a part of the entire cloud strategy, we are talking about the app stores which have to be set up across the country. And in fact, we've closely studied the UK's cloud store, which is, I think, a very good example in terms of trying to see how it can be a marketplace, giving services not only on infrastructure, but even on consultancy and all. So, and bringing clear transparency in terms of publishing the cost and other things. So those learnings will have to be seen how they can be used as best practices and learn from the success of others. So what I see, of course, so what we're seeing is, while the strategy is trying to touch on various components in terms of the national clouds, in terms of the state clouds, center of excellence, app stores, and a lot of initiatives in the capacity building. And we do see, of course, empowered committees, expert committees set up, architecture management office, to take this whole initiative forward. I actually see private, of course, working very closely, and a lot of inputs that we got from the private in terms of being a part of the governance, and in terms of being able to participate in this entire cloud initiative upfront, has kind of been, they have been extremely valuable inputs, I would say. And so there is, I would say, of course, as far as challenges are concerned, we are slightly better off to begin with, because we have our own infrastructures in place. And today the interoperability issues are helping us in the sense that we are kind of going to start with more of location-based cloud services, I would say, because you're augmenting the national data centers, the state data centers per se and all. And so the security to begin with would be, you need to have dynamic security, zones, policies, VM between VMs, end user. So those are which can be easily tackled with the technology and the awareness. But as we move around, and we have a private community also, so we are also going to work very closely with the counter group in terms of trying to see data segregation, data location issues, the legal issues, and which we will have to parallelly look at. And I think in the next 1 year time, we are going to see a lot happening. And we do have a lot of DVCs and all with the US, trying to learn from them, and trying to see how we can fast track. And let me tell you, India is not far behind. We've actually seen what countries across the world are doing. And we see that because what Indian government has taken up in terms of the cloud initiative and taking it to a policy and strategy. I was only seeing Australia today has the strategy, and in a very sporadic way. And the cloud implementation roadmap is just starting. So that way I would say I think this is just the right time for us, all of us, to work together, try and get as many inputs as possible, and see that cloud actually reigns, and it reigns e-governance services across the country. Thank you.